We'll hold those up again. All right. That's a good start. So I guess we're going. We're not doing the live broadcast this time, but it's Mark Graven and JFlinch Learning back. We're going to do video today. It's also going to be an audio podcast. It's episode 16 of Lean Whiskey. It's good to see you, Jamie.
Great to see you. And I'm used to seeing you in one of two locations, and now you're in a new location.
Yeah, like why is there a third location? So I'm in Southern California now. Like during a pandemic, why not relocate? But my wife had been talking to a company since January and had a really, really good opportunity. She's now chief operating officer of an aerospace company that is based here in LA. So goodbye, Orlando. Hello, LA. So this is our temporary furnished apartment. I've been accused of this looking like a artificial Zoom background, but
yeah, I could see that argument, but it hasn't been terribly lived in yet. So that's, I think, one of the requirements. Especially springtime, moving from Orlando to California probably isn't as dramatic as going from, say, Texas to Wisconsin. So I'm sure there's some things that are the same, but it's a long trip, a long a long change to go through, especially during a pandemic. So I've been out 4 times in 9 weeks. So
yeah.
I have very little experience with what life is like on the outside.
Yeah.
So you got a whole dose of that. So share about what'd you learn and experience on your coast to coast drive.
Yeah, I mean, it was an hour short of the East Coast and about 10 minutes short of the West Coast. So almost coast to coast, 2,500 miles. We drove 2 days from Orlando to the Dallas area, and we were at our house there, and my in-laws live with us, and we had 3 days there. And then we had 3 days to LA. So we stayed in 3 different hotels along the way in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, El Paso, Texas, and Phoenix. And it was interesting to see the difference, 3 different sub-brands within the Marriott family of hotels. 2 of them, like they were all trying to do something that was different. There were plexiglass panels at the front desk. They were trying to do some things for the employees there. The Residence Inn had a giant tub of hand sanitizer with the big pump bottle. We would check into the hotels, and frankly, we figured better safe than sorry. We brought Lysol spray and paper towels, sprayed down every hard surface we thought we might interact with in the hotel. The hotels all now say they're ramping up, or they're getting to different cleanliness standards, but I figured a little bit of spray was worth it. The remote control went in a Ziploc bag, which I've got friends who've done that for years.
That's one I haven't done yet, but based on some of the studies, I can certainly see why
it works. The hotel in Phoenix, strangely enough, like my wife had booked the reservation, and she went in to her app to try to find when's the mobile key going to be ready. Wasn't ready. So she went into the front desk and asked, can I get the mobile key? When's the room going to be ready? And they said, we've turned off the mobile key functionality because of COVID-19. And we both thought that's like the opposite of what they should have been doing.
In fact, I think they've included in their commercial how keyless entry is going to be used more frequently to be safer.
Yeah. So our attempt at contactless check-in didn't happen. So then they had to touch her ID and credit card, and then so that was frustrating. But I think along the way, wearing masks, stopping and get gas involved, wearing mask. If I was going to go inside, let's say to use the bathroom, if I was just pumping gas, I would use paper towels. for surfaces that I was having to touch, and then hand sanitizer in the car, or better yet, going inside using soap and water. But there's trade-offs of how much more exposure do you want to people. Soap and water is better than hand sanitizer, but staying away from others is helpful. So we tried, we had a plan. We tried to do it as safely as we could. And at the risk of turning this into like a safe travel podcast, I mean, thanks for asking, or, you're going to start traveling again. We actually did take one flight the weekend before we relocated, and in flying, is a different experience these days. With, again, we wore the mask from home, from door to door. Yeah. And so for a 2.5-hour flight from Orlando to Dallas or back, mask didn't come off. No water, no food, lots of hand sanitizer, lots of soap and water hand washing. Just trying to do that. It's not safe, but trying to be as safe as reasonably possible.
Yeah, but you're for me, flights were, and it's this is a small grievance, if it will, or flights were, I don't want to say they were relaxing, but that's where I would sit back. I'd do some reading, at least on flights home. I'd usually have a drink, but certainly you're kind of on edge the whole time, trying to not make a mistake or do anything stupid.
Yeah. I felt on edge for some of the airline staff who didn't have masks on. I haven't flown after May 1st, but American claims, everyone's going to wear masks. But I saw flight attendants without masks, talking very close proximity to the pilot or the co-pilot before the flight. 2 gate agents were talking to each other, like shoulder to shoulder at the terminal, typing and talking. And then the one guy walked away and went to the PA and made the announcement about social distancing and masks. I'm like, okay. And so I don't know if they were choosing to not wear masks or if they weren't available, but I feel bad any of these times where somebody is working and you feel like they're putting themselves potentially in harm's way.
Yeah, and I could imagine if you're interacting with that many people, you kind of feel like, well, at that point, is the mask really going to make a difference? Now, of course, it does, right? But you can see how if you're going to be that exposed and interacting with that many people, you're just like, at that point, I either get it or I don't.
Well, and I think there's that factor of, am I an asymptomatic carrier? And so if we want to put it in a lean frame, talking about respect for people, arguably wearing that mask is a way of showing respect to others. I don't know if I'm inadvertently spreading virus. So there's that factor too.
Well, looking at it through a lean lens, and I don't think we want to get too deep into the virus itself, but we talk about problem solving with point of occurrence and point of detection. Mm-hmm. And the further apart they are, the harder it is to do problem solving. And certainly that's a challenge with this particular virus.
Yeah. So that you're right. That does make problem solving difficult. But maybe I want to ask you about some stuff you've been working on, and we can get to the cocktail talk. I'm going to pace myself.
Yeah. So we'll get
on my drink, but I mean, you've been putting out all kinds of interesting content and doing new things in your time at home. If you want to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so I've certainly invested in time with my clients and giving them a little bit of extra. I've also helped a lot of small businesses for free where I can. And my advice to them on a strategic level has been double down on what you're best at. Right? Just focus on what you're best at and double down and go harder on those things. And so for me, it's always been relationships and content. Right? Those are probably some of my core things that I've decided to double down on. And so what's interesting is I've launched, in fact, today the email went out about the JFlinch Learning Lab, which is really a more deliberate, long-term focus on training and learning programs that will be fundamentally virtual, but they'll include coaching, they'll include activities, and yes, they'll include videos. Mm-hmm. But they aren't. It's not just static videos. It's all experiential. So that's actually a pivot that I kind of had on my roadmap anyway. So I would argue that it's not a COVID reaction, but I have reduced. I've gained about 2 days a week because I'm not on airplanes in capacity, and then second, uh, I've been able to experiment more with remote learning by requirement, and so that's allowed me to do some experimentation that's helped me shape my thinking about what the JFlinch Learning Lab is going to be all about. So long way away from fulfilling my concepts and sketches and ideas, but headed down a path there. So that's been some of what I spent my time on.
Well, and so maybe COVID-19 has accelerated or gave you the time to do sooner what you had wanted to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. Just because 2 days a week on a plane, those are tough days to call true capacity, and that's all back now. That's all freed up.
And you've been you put out a series of free videos on YouTube, and you've been doing webinars and.
Yeah, I've been doing webinars. Did one the other day. Had some technical problems, but we go through those things. I did a 16 video series on strategic thinking, which wasn't even on my roadmap, but I found myself having lots of conversations early on with companies about strategy, about pivots. I did a webinar for about 400 business owners on strategic pivots. And so I put together these 16 videos, 6 of which are interviews, the other is more content, and thought, normally this would be sort of behind the firewall, but given how many companies are struggling with their strategic thinking right now, I thought, let me just put this out there for free and make it available for more folks. So yeah, those are out as of last week, and I've gotten a lot of great comments on those. So those are fantastic. So
good.
What have you been, besides moving across country? What have you been working on?
So I've been doing remote work with a healthcare client that I continue supporting, and that's work I've been doing through the firm Value Capture. And so I've also done some marketing work with them, including launching a new podcast. And so we call that podcast Habitual Excellence, because that's a phrase that the founder of Value Capture, Paul O'Neill, used a lot. And it was a meaningful phrase to us. And Mr. O'Neill passed away just a couple of weeks ago. So we'd been planning the podcast and had the name. And so the first episode, again, this had been the plan, was to share about 35 minutes of a speech that Mr. O'Neill gave. We're doing interviews, and we're doing different formats around themes focused around leadership and healthcare improvement. Like, how do you drive towards zero harm, and what's the culture you need? That focuses on safety and helps drive habitual excellence. So, if anyone's listening, if you are, say, if you're listening, hear my voice, you are listening to a podcast. So therefore you probably like podcasts, and you might want to check out Habitual Excellence if you search wherever you're listening to this podcast.
Yep. So that's your third podcast now, on top of your Lean blog interviews, which are up to episode 300. What now?
Step 370.
370. So that's incredible. Lean whiskey, which is now at episode 16. And now Habitual Excellence. So.
Well, and there's also Lean Blog Audio, where I sometimes read blog posts. There's KaiNexus podcast. So I guess this is the fifth podcast that I'm helping produce or involved in. But that's been great fun, and I love the content, and so happy to be able to share that with others. The other content that I'm consuming at the moment, our theme today, people who are watching the video may have noticed, our theme is cocktails. That's new.
Yep. So I don't think either one of us make cocktails a whole lot. You probably do more than I do.
Yeah.
And I do more in the summer. Although in my themed shirt, you don't know the difference because you're in Orlando in California. But we've had a very late spring. I'm really ready for some warmer weather. I mean, it looks beautiful outside. It's just you get out there and the wind blows and you need a coat, but I'll make more mixed drinks in the summer for sure. But yeah, we both did cocktails, of course, whiskey-based cocktails.
So tell us what you made.
So I made an old fashioned, which is kind of my go-to. So I used Glens Creek. Our friend David Meyer, Glens Creek.
Yep.
Credovito Vivo, which is his new one. Really roughly translates into live crow, as opposed to old crow. And as we were talking about this, I went to my bar, realizing I hadn't made a mixed drink in a little while. Found out it was out of simple syrup. Yeah. So I've made my own. It's not really complicated, but my own homemade simple syrup using maple syrup.
Okay.
And I have to say, really like it. It adds, you basically, the easiest way to do it is make equal parts of maple syrup and water, shake it up, and you're good to go. It's not a complicated recipe.
So it's like 1-to-1, like sugar and water, simple syrup would be.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and it's not, maple syrup isn't all sugar, right? But yeah, 1-to-1 ratio between the two. Shake it up. There's no distilling involved or any of that. So, but the flavor profile, it doesn't just add sweet; it adds a little bit of that richness and depth. So that's what I'm using. I have the Angostura
bitters.
Yep. So those are my go-to. I do realize I'm running out of cherries, but that's usually because I go usually one more than a recipe would call for. And when you're at the bottom of the jar, you get a little too much syrup, so that's the other challenge. But yeah, so that's what I'm enjoying tonight. How about yourself?
I'll talk about my drink, and then we can debate method, right? So we got process guys. Like, this isn't like, pardon the interruption, where we argue and debate, but this is the preview teaser. This might be the closest thing we get to like a I don't know if it would be an impassioned debate, or it might be just a nerdy comparison.
Or both.
To me, the triumvirate of whiskey-based cocktails are, of course, the old-fashioned. The Manhattan was always also a favorite. I do make those. 2 ounces. I prefer rye. 2 ounces of rye, 3/4 ounces of sweet vermouth, and a couple dashes of bitters. And bitters are fun. You can play around with different bitters that have different flavors and what have you. But the third leg of the stool, and I'm mixing metaphors, to me is a drink I was introduced to later, more recently, maybe just a couple years ago, the Boulevardier. So,
it's been a while since I've had one, and if so, it would be at a bar. I've never made one, and I'm sure I don't have all the right ingredients, so I'd have to wait a little while till I can get them. But I'm definitely interested in giving it a shot.
It's pretty easy. So it's a variation, like a little bit of history. The Negroni, which, like, to me in the summer, that's a great cocktail. It's equal parts, 1 ounce each, gin, sweet vermouth, and Campari, which is kind of a bitter, sweetish liqueur. It's probably more bitter than anything. So that might be the one ingredient you're missing, Jamie?
I'm definitely missing that, yeah.
So Campari is about $28, $30 a bottle, and a little bit goes a long way because we're not using that much. Now, the Boulevardier is basically a whiskey Negroni, but through my own, I'm giving it too much credit, but I'm going to call it a PDSA process, or an experimental process. I've come to learn that, like, to me, I like the balance of a more whiskey forward drink here.
Yes.
So my recipe that I've used, and some bartenders agree, I'm using 2 ounces of, in this case, Michter's straight rye. It's 42% alcohol, but I like Michter's a lot. I prefer for cocktails something that's like 46 to 50%, because ice and it dilutes a little bit. But
it's by design. That's what cocktails are.
Sure. So I'm using Michter's, 3/4 ounce of Campari, and then 3/4 ounce of sweet vermouth. And this is a vermouth I've never tried before. I like splurging a little bit on the vermouth. This is about $17 for a half bottle size.
Okay.
But again, like it goes bad relatively quickly. It's fortified wine, so you don't want to keep it more than a couple of weeks.
Okay.
If you want fresh flavor. So it's a little bit whiskey heavy, but I think it's a really good balanced whiskey, sweet, bitter cocktail.
Yeah, and I think we both like rye in our whiskey cocktails. So I was going to use a Dad's Hat rye, but I recently used that for another episode. So I thought let me try it with David's bourbon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we both use rye quite a bit for our some of our mixed drinks.
I like rye old fashions because to me the rye spice and the syrup, the sweetness, bourbon old fashioned can be good, but it runs the risk of maybe being too sweet.
Lots of sweetness. Yep.
But so now process talk. So I've been a convert to the school that says you should stir cocktails. You should only shake cocktails if they include citrus, because you want to help somehow. You have to chemically get the citrus to incorporate. And then I think dairy, if you're somehow doing a cocktail with cream, Bailey's or something, I don't know. I think that's right. For sure, citrus. As far as whiskey talk goes, I'm only going to claim to be like 90% correct on things. Because I don't know, the bar expert nerds say somehow you bruise the alcohol if you shake it. So I'll admit I have not done the side-by-side comparison.
Right.
But I did stir this in a big glass cocktail stirrer with a spoon and strained it into the glass, and I'm using kind of the big round ball ice cube. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. So first of all, you need the gear, right? You need the right mixing jar for that. You need the spoon. You need the strainer, right, for all of that. And I don't, I think if you were really splitting hairs, I would definitely agree that stirring is better than shaking. But I have enough PDSA to do on my mixed drinks.
Right.
And like the variation from drink to drink in me getting the right proportions and adding some variation and even trying different whiskeys and running out of simple syrup probably is a greater impact than whether I shake or stir.
Sure.
So I think it's a matter of where you are on the progression of things that matter. Now, to be fair, when I do use a shaker, but a lot of times I'll also put in a big round ball ice cube in the shaker, so it's less likely to chip. It's less likely to dilute, and it's just I'm just using. I have like 3 of them, the ball makers, so it's not like it costs me anything. It's just one more thing to fill up. And I don't shake it like this.
Oh, okay. So you're maybe you're stirring it inside a shaker.
I think that might be a fair point, right? So I might be stirring it inside a shaker. It's still more than just using the stirrer, but yeah, I'm not banging the heck out of it.
Yeah, because I mean, like making a margarita, like I will shake that. But with an old fashioned, this is splitting hairs, but I do that sometimes. That's like, so in Manhattan, I would stir. The Boulevardier I would stir. I was taught when we took a cocktail making class that an old fashioned, you can layer it in the glass. So you can have your ice, you can put in the bitters, put in the syrup, put in the whiskey, and then just sort of like just circulate it a little bit within the glass. And you're not getting the chilling dynamic. That's one reason to shake a drink.
It is one reason to shake a drink, and yeah, I drink more mixed drinks in the summer when half the point is to drink it chilled. At least for me. So I think that's a factor. I think there's no way you're getting a complete, if you just mix it in the glass, meaning you just put the ingredients and layer it.
Right.
There's no way the first sip tastes like the last sip.
You can kind of like get the spoon into the bottom and kind of.
Well, if you use a spoon and stir it, sure. But if you're just layering it and drinking it,
right? No, but
there's no way that all the sips of the drink are the same. But maybe that's part of the adventure.
It's more of a bottom to top process instead of a round and round process. But so here's what I propose. A couple episodes ago, I think we talked about the really nice water dropper that you gifted me, and thank you again for that. I've ordered. I'm going to send you, and then whenever we do a cocktail episode again in the future, I'm going to suggest we do a side by side with like 2 mini cocktails. So I'm sending you a stirring glass with a strainer. I'm sending you. I like the Good Grips measuring stainless steel jigger because it has the 2 ounce mark, the 1.5, the 1 ounce, the 3/4, the 1/2 ounce is good measurements, and a spoon. So we'll have to experiment maybe.
We'll have to experiment. That's a great test. What's really sad is, I don't even have a jigger, so I use a kitchen measuring cup to get my proper pour of whiskey. So I'm stealing stuff from the kitchen, bringing it to the bar, making my drink, and then have to make sure it all gets back. So I am poorly outfitted for mixing cocktails. So that'll make the difference, and that'll be we're coming up on summer, so that'll be a perfect summer episode of Lean Westy.
And I'm thinking of the old expression: "A good carpenter never blames his tools." Jamie.
I think a good carpenter cares a whole lot about their tools, so you can put the adage aside.
Yeah. All right. So maybe, we've said lean, we've said PDSA a couple of times, but maybe we want to get into the deeper.
We probably should.
Lean chat, business chat. So you came up with the topic, and we've been working from home, but you found a couple of articles that we'll link to in the show notes if you want to kind of introduce the topic, Jamie.
Yeah, so it actually started with an article going back. I don't have the date in front of me, but going back quite a ways now from China, which is really the first work-at-home experiment. And there's been more, articles in Europe and ones here. I heard tonight on the news. I can't remember the name of the company. A company announcing that they're going to tell their employees you can work from home permanently. And so this has been a great experiment, and that's the word I've been deliberately using, although some of these articles have, is experiment the heck out of this because it's new to everybody. So the key question is then what will businesses, and businesses is kind of generic, but managers, executives, team leaders learn from this work at home experiment? So we have a whole bunch of articles to share. But I do think, it was interesting just to start off with the first experiments, which were in China. And I have a whole bunch of friends in China. I have clients in China. I talked to a few of them early on, well before we were shut down. And they were shut down. And it was very surreal just hearing them talk about it then. But certainly, I think one of the quotes from one of the articles was interesting because it reflects how this might really shape how management might be done. And this was a Shinzun, 36-year-old, a manager at Pingguan Bank in Shenzhen. He says he feels he has less control over his employees when they're not in the office. Quote, working from home made administration harder due to less efficient communication and employees slacking off at work doing personal things. When working from home, my team members sometimes respond late to me, which makes me feel out of control. Now, it's a bank. I'm sure it's a back office processing based on the way he's describing it. Every function is different, but it really is one aspect, maybe the crux of this whole work from home experiment for most companies.
Well, and so the word control is an interesting red flag to me. I think, leaders may need to sort of try to get over that control habit, or it sounds like a problem. And I sometimes there's an illusion of control, but when you think of control versus leading, setting direction, and empowering, coaching instead of controlling, and the slacking off. I think the reality now. My wife and I have the distraction of the move. but we've got no kids, we've got no pets. Try to be really empathetic to colleagues and people I'm meeting with who do have to juggle that. Mm-hmm. And they have interruptions in meetings, and the cat jumps on their lap, or the dog is tearing up the garden, and that's life now.
Right.
And I think sometimes people need, given the anxiety and stress that's induced by this, you call it slacking off. Is it necessary mental health time? There's different ways of looking at this.
Yeah, I think, and I think that's the key question, is the difference between, right now and permanent working from home conditions, right? Mm-hmm. And so, slacking off being one aspect, to pretend that you could see someone at their desk and know that they were giving their work their full attention, right, is part of the illusion, right?
Right.
I remember going back, 20 some years, 25 years ago almost. We took, and I was in a manufacturing plant. We basically sliced off all the cubicle walls in half.
Yeah.
And there was a couple employees, the ones that complained the loudest were ones that they'd come to work for 12 hours a day, but they pretty much sit at their desk and take a nap because all somebody could see is the back of their head as they walk by the cubicle opening. So, and now they were exposed. And so I think the idea that, because I can see everybody, because they're here at work, they're inherently more productive is perhaps the first fallacy, because we certainly don't know that. And I think it is often an illusion.
Yeah. And when it comes to communication, if there's less efficient communication, there are different ways we may need to experiment and figure out how to better communicate. If the methods that the manager from the bank and his employees are using right now are inefficient, there's always a better way. That's my Kaizen hat, I guess. Saying that, but I think there's the question of productivity and what are we measuring? Are we measuring hours and activity, or are we measuring value to the customer? Are we measuring results and business performance? It's usually easier to measure the inputs.
Right.
I've seen some articles where people, I wouldn't like this, or people, they're literally being measured how many letters are they striking on their keyboard every day. I'm like, well, if I'm being paid by the letter, I'm going to write a lot of long, meaningless, unproductive emails, maybe.
Well, sure, and I'm sure, I don't know if they subtract when you hit backspace, but it's kind of like putting the car in reverse and hoping the mileage comes off.
Type it right the first time, Jamie.
Right. So I think metrics are going to be helpful for functions where activity does equal output, right? So, in certain jobs, engineering, for example, marketing, hours doesn't equal value. Hours doesn't equal output or contribution. It's about talent. It's about creativity. It's about that moment, right? So I think there's some jobs where we have to evaluate outcomes, and there are jobs that are fundamentally based on activity. But that's where metrics, not this air of control, but metrics can be your friend in that case, right? How do I know my employees are productive? Well, because their metrics show it. And I've talked to organizations who even in more knowledge-based, more creative-based processes like product development, they actually have good measures, and they've already found that there's parts of product development that were more productive at home, and some parts that were less productive, right? And so I think there will be some companies that evaluate this and say, we're going to let more people work from home, period. I think there's others that are going to take some of their processes and say, you know what, when you're in this phase of work, when you're in creative mode or dive deep mode or data analysis mode, go work at home, skip the meetings and just focus, right? And don't be distracted by all the stuff going on in the office. So I think there'll be process changes. I think there'll be behavior changes, and I think there'll be metric changes as well that come along with this. And then the big one is, if I'm managing not by oversight, but by through metrics and performance, and I wasn't already using managers as coaches, because that's one reason to have more of them, then do we need as many managers, right? Can we have a flatter organization? And again, I think if you're investing in coaching, I think you need a less flat organization. But if it's really management is about just managing performance, and you have better tools for communication and measuring performance, you don't need as many managers.
Yeah. So one thing, within the context of KaiNexus, and in terms of disclosures, software company, Jamie is an investor. I'm an advisor to the company and have an ownership stake. For 2 months now, the whole company, the Austin office, the Dallas office, has been completely work from home mode. And now, as within Texas, as things are starting to loosen up a little bit, Greg, the CEO, Matt, the COO, Jeff, the chief revenue officer, have had conversations, and I've talked to them because I've been prepared a webinar about ideas about going back to work and trying to do so safely. And so I was picking their brains. And there's this question of, it's not even so much when to go back to the office, but if is the conversation that's being had. Matt, the COO, and maybe this was within the tech team realm that he leads most directly, he was saying, that they feel 90 to 95% effective in work from home mode. So then Greg, who, is of course an ER doctor and CEO, is kind of looking at the risk reward. Like, well, so if we go back to the office and we get marginal effectiveness improvement, but now we're creating risk as a relatively small company of about 20 employees. One employee getting really sick is bad. Two getting really sick is devastating. Like, well, why introduce that risk? So on the one hand, they've had good conversations about what would you do to open up an office most safely. But then again, we're like, well, should we even go back? The conversations are being had there.
Yeah, and I think there's multiple. There's the risk factor, right, of how that plays out. I think there's also just the cost of infrastructure. Now, I do think there'll be some changes where stipends. We've already seen some of the stipends for home office expenses and stuff like that will be offered. But, KaiNexus is based in Austin, not exactly the cheapest real estate. I know they're not based downtown, but how valuable is that expense if it's really not affecting the outcome?
Yeah.
So I guess, this is an area where it's not transactions, right? It's not action equals outcome. It's really about outcome. So how at KaiNexus are you evaluating that perspective of effectiveness, and what leads to that sort of 90-95% confidence in the effectiveness?
I mean, that 90 to 95 is not a measurement. That's like just a swag. It's a guesstimate. But even during this era, I mean, customers are still being supported. And a lot of that is one-on-one calls and web meetings between a KaiNexus customer experience person and the customer. Huge difference doing that from home? Probably not. We've actually closed deals and signed new customers in this environment. So sales can be effective in the different ways you would measure performance. So there's that question of the work getting done.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll also, just give a shout out to the KaiNexus leadership team that they've focused not just on maintaining the business and at least keeping things stable, even if growth ambitions maybe get tempered a bit. They're focused on business results and the work that needs to be done, but they're also focusing on the employees and their whole person. Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot of there's a daily Zoom meeting in the morning that's a very kind of tactical check-in, like what's your plan for the day? Do you need help with anything? We do different huddles and meetings all the time, and there's always been a few remote employees, so web meetings are not a brand new thing.
Right.
But end of the day is a much more free form, like basically water cooler time, and then there's a Friday Zoom happy hour, and there's been a lot of focus on just checking in. It's not just, are you getting your work done, but how are you doing? I think those are both important conversations to have. And I think they go hand in hand. When people realize they work for an organization where the leaders care about them as individuals, that strengthens their commitment to the company.
Right. Yeah, and I've been, I think we're all more attuned to it right now, but I've always believed that sort of personal check-ins and one-on-ones is kind of the first thing you want to lead off in, and actually develop standards for making sure that's part of it. Definitely, I've been spending even more time with even people I don't know, and I'm meeting for the first time, doing sort of what I'll call mental health check-ins at the beginning of calls. Just because as I've said multiple times, this is going to be the third wave of the crisis, right? First virus, second economic, and third mental health. But to your point around you guys already being used to it, some companies were a lot. So Corvo, where I was on the executive team last 3 years, we had five different locations across the executive team. The company's 30 some locations, quite used to working over video, over other remote purposes. And I found an interesting stat. It was from 2005 to 17, which is, of course, not that big a window. It's 12 years, but you think about technology, almost seems like a lifetime. But in the United States, there was a 159% increase in remote work.
Yeah.
And so this was already headed in that direction. I think that number was before the pandemic, or actually going back a few years. Over 3% of the population was working remotely. Obviously, we won't maintain the levels that we're at now, but is the biggest thing that changed that people's perceptions of remote work were forced into the experiment, and at least answer, I don't know if that'll be effective. Well, you've been forced to find out.
Forced experiment.
It's been a forced experiment for sure, and I think many have found out that as long as they're deliberate about how they design their work, they can be just as effective.
So then, we both talked a little bit about supporting clients remotely, and I talked a little bit earlier about the risks, if not unpleasantness, of travel, business travel. What are your thoughts about, like, how do you weigh the pros and cons of when or if to travel again?
Yeah, I mean, as somebody that has at-risk medical conditions, I like I'm putting that out in the future. I have no idea when I will. I definitely want to see clear evidence that I don't need. There's no work I need to do that's worth risking my own life, and so I'll personally probably take it very slow. That being said, I started this year actually with only 2 clients because I entered a new phase. One of them was in Israel, and it was coaching that was only about less than a day a quarter. I'm not going to fly to Israel for less than a day, a quarter of work. And so the whole engagement was planned remotely. And that was, I'll say long before, but that was before we even contemplated these challenges. And to me, it's been perfectly well effective. I look at my own work. I certainly see that I can do an awful lot of it working remotely. And I think companies, for their own purposes, will find the same thing. I'm sure that there's things that we just can't wait to get together. I know for me, being able to, quite frankly, go out for dinner with a client and talk about something that wasn't on the agenda is part of that I'm going to miss the most right now.
Right.
But I don't see. I first see business travel taking a good 2 to 4 years to recover.
Yeah.
And I think there's parts of it that may never recover, that may never go back to the way it was.
Yeah. I mean, conferences, speaking engagements, consulting engagements, the different things I do and you do. Yeah, it's all up in the air. With me working with healthcare clients, the one primary client I've had is really weighing the safety dynamic of, any additional outside visitor increases risk, especially if it's somebody traveling from another state. And one clinic I was working with, was working with expectant mothers, and so there's additional sensitivity, and so there's questions around travel safety, and then there's for me that additional dynamic of potentially at-risk patient populations, and then I've got to think about my own health as well, and I think business travel will become increasingly unpleasant, where, like you mentioned, some of the things that are fun and help tip the balance toward making it tolerable may go away if it's a matter of waking up, eating a grab and go breakfast because you can't have the breakfast buffet in the lounge anymore, or going to work and then coming home and eating takeout and being isolated in your hotel room. I mean, I'm an introvert, but I like to get out. I like to go to dinners with people.
Yep.
So, yeah, it just changes that question of like, is the business travel worth it? And can the work be done in other ways? That's the other.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the key. And I've been experimenting with that. That's the JFlinch Learning Lab is an opportunity for that for me. So one person I've been paying attention to, and I only learned about her because she's a fellow graduate of Lehigh, is a woman named Sasha Connor, who runs an organization now called Virtual Work Insider. And her claim to fame is that she was at a very senior level, basically director of marketing for the Clorox company. And she ran an entire team remotely and really kind of broke some barriers. I'm sure she wasn't the first, but she definitely did things, and she talks about it a lot. She's definitely become, I'll say, world famous because she was already a remote work expert before this came about. But she would, one story I remember her telling in a I think it was a webinar that she did, was, she was director of marketing for Clorox. She lived in East Coast, I think Pennsylvania. There was a focus group in California, and they said, you have to fly out here. She said, why? Well, I'm not running the focus group. It's like, oh, but you need to, react and, give your input. Well, okay, I can watch it on a monitor, and the person who's in the room that is running it, I can text them. Why should I fly to California to run to observe a focus group, right? That's all she was doing. And so that's what she did, and it worked just as well. And so, she basically started challenging all the assumptions that you in fact have to be, you have to travel in order to do your work.
Yeah, you said challenging, and I just taken a note to make the comment. What I'm hearing reminds me of, like, to me, an important lean mindset of challenging the way we've always done it. And that's happening a lot right now. And that can be a great opportunity. So, like, for example, from a healthcare clinic standpoint, there's been a huge revolution in a lot of organizations. If telehealth video visits was something that organizations wanted to do, it reminds me of what you were saying earlier, Jamie. The pandemic has accelerated that. It went from a nice to do someday to a must do right now.
Right.
And so there's a lot more video medicine taking place. And then for things that have to be done in the office, there is now risk, and you can be proactive in thinking about, you don't want people near each other in the waiting rooms. A new process. I'm curious to get your reaction. Voice of the customer, Jamie, as a patient, potential patient. You check in online through your app, which is already a possibility today. And then when you arrive, you send a signal through the app that says, you know what, I'm here and I'm in the parking lot and I'm sitting in the comfort of my car. And when you're ready for me, text me and I'll come in and you tell me go to room 8 through the text message. I don't need someone to hold my hand going down the hallway.
Yep.
To reduce some of the contact and interaction. And you think like, maybe we should have always been doing it that way, at least with the technology, like pandemic or not. Like I could sit in my car and listen to music or listen to a podcast, I should say podcast, or listen to satellite radio and then, come on in when they're ready for me. Hopefully.
Yeah, I would love that, right? But it goes back to the keyless hotel room that isn't always followed, right? It doesn't always work. The technology doesn't always work. The user isn't always ready. I would love that. I think doctor office waiting rooms are the scariest places on the planet. So I would love that idea, and I hate waiting there, and I try to figure out which seat to get that keeps me away from other people. So I love that idea. But then I also think about, the biggest consumer of healthcare is the elderly, who are, again, future elderly 20 years from now will be plenty of tech savvy, but we're not there yet. And so I think we have to be careful that we don't turn the use of technology for remote work and its many forms into a ageism problem. We just need to be careful about all of that.
Yeah, and I think there's that question of, like, again, in general, being careful. Like, if there is a preventive measure that you can take that has no real downside or enormous cost, why not? So, like, to me, like wearing a mask out someplace might not be perfect. Is wearing a mask going to hurt? No. Washing my hands more frequently. Like I heard advice, it was actually a video from a woman who was born with a immune disorder. And then to help fix that, she had a bone marrow transplant. In this video, she talked about basically, it was like she was living in a pandemic world before we were.
Right.
Hand hygiene, all of this was super critical. And her one rule of thumb that I've tried to live by here, she said, if you can't remember the last time you washed your hands, you should probably just wash your hands.
Right.
Like even if you're home, because like if I'm out and about and I don't know, my phone is not the cleanest. Phones are not the cleanest of devices.
Right.
Like what's the risk and the harm if you've got the soap? Wash your hands. Like now my wife, if she puts lotion on her hands because she feels like her hands have gotten dry, that's a reasonable countermeasure that can address that issue. So I think there's a lot of these things like, using a paper towel to grab the gas pump handle, like we talked about. What is there a slight minuscule amount of harm to the environment? Maybe from the paper and what happens to it. But like, I'm willing to err on the side of safety, and if it doesn't hurt, why not do it? Like, I like personally, do I wipe down all of my groceries when I get home with a Lysol disinfectant wipe? No, because for one, if I touch stuff, I wash my hands. Right. If I take stuff out of a package and I'm about to eat it, what do? I wash my hands. But if somebody else wants to Lysol wipe the heck out of everything, probably can't hurt. There are certain countermeasures, though, that people should not do because it could hurt, like rinsing their vegetables in a diluted bleach solution. Like I've heard experts saying, like, well, no, don't do that. That will hurt you. So I think that's just part of what we're trying to navigate now.
Yeah, and I think people have to, make sure they're understanding where their source of information. I saw a video about, we might be able to extract antibodies from llama blood, and there's been llama farmers that have been getting phone calls saying, "Hey, can I extract blood from your llamas so I can drink it?" That's not how science works, right? And I've said multiple times, I do hope that one of the silver linings of all of this is that we have more kids, more 18-year-olds, 16-year-olds that want to go into the sciences. I think we never can have enough people that have studied science as it is. But I think we've strayed a bit from the work from home experiment. And if there's one conclusion, I think it's that there's a whole. It's not an experiment; it's dozens or hundreds of experiments, and that some of them, maybe most of them, will turn out to be productive, and many of them will stick.
Yeah, and I think it's about being experimental, following plan, do, study, adjust cycles. You know, we had a listener question. Maybe we can just touch on it briefly because I think there are some common themes here. Where a listener asks, how can we apply lean thinking to large-scale efforts like reopening a state, contact tracing, or similar? I think, how can we be experimental, and can we really gauge cause and effect when there's roughly a 2-week delay between changes we might make in society and infection rates?
Right.
If you look at, system dynamics is taught at MIT or from Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, cause and effect analysis, I think you touched on this earlier, gets really challenging when there are time delays. So we'll reopen society a lot and a week later say, people aren't getting sick, people aren't dying, but then a week after that, whoops, maybe.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's where, again, at a state level, I'm not even going to comment on, but at a company level, I've dealt with so many problems where people say, well, I've made this improvement. We won't really know if it works for 6 months. Well, then keep it open for 6 months, right? That's your test.
Right.
And I think as it applies to, changes that companies make, right, which is probably far more of our listeners than, say, government policymakers, then make sure that you're not declaring success on what works and what doesn't work prematurely, right?
Yeah.
So experimentation is key, but make sure you understand how are you going to test your hypothesis before you start. Because if you don't know how you test your hypothesis, then it's not an experiment, it's just changing stuff, right? So know what your hypothesis is and know how you're going to test it. And if that requires a 2-week wait or a 4-week wait, then fine, then that's your test, right? But make that your test and evaluate it appropriately. So I think there's so many micro problems to solve, from shared bathrooms to entrances to crossing over boundaries in factories, that we need to really make sure that when we make a change, we are thinking about it from an experimental basis.
Yeah. All right. So do you want to touch a little bit on the closing fun question? We took a very abbreviated approach to the listener question. Is there anything else? What do you think? We're figuring this out as we go. We had a plan, but we're studying and adjusting as we go.
Well, I think for the listener question, because I do think it's an interesting approach. I mean, Ken Lean, I think there's an incredible number of people that were critical of Jim Womack's early response to, lean should take a back seat, or I don't remember what he was saying about COVID. But I do think there are methods that are worth exploring. There's certain things that have to scale up, like laboratory services, contact tracing. These are places where training within industry can serve us really, really well to train people to scale up really fast.
Right.
So I think we have to think about that. I think it's about breaking problems down, understanding, not broad basis, but understanding all point of occurrence, point of detection, all the potential failure modes. I mean, do an FMEA analysis on contacting other people at your office.
Right.
Right. I mean, these tools and methods work to understand systems of work. So use them for this purpose.
Yeah. Yes. Webinar. I got invited to do a webinar through Entrepreneur Magazine, and I already recorded it. It's not being broadcast until June 3rd. But FMEA is one of the main things I mentioned of like being proactive.
Awesome.
Failure mode effects analysis. We can't afford to just wait for somebody in the workplace to get sick and then do reactive problem solving.
No, because you will have infected 30% of the organization by that point. So yeah, look at the work, look at the day in the life. In fact, do direct observation. Go through a day in your own life and focus on every point in your day where you might touch a similar surface or come in contact with other people, and then use that as a potential failure mode and figure out how you might be able to eliminate or reduce it. Whether reduce it is cleaning schedules or elimination is changing the work process, right? And that's how you eliminate failures through FMEA. I think that's a fantastic tool to use here.
Yeah. So a tool that's relatively old, but I think well proven, and it's a mindset as much as anything. I mean, it's a matter of being proactive, figuring out what could go wrong, and putting preventive measures in place in advance, and then evaluating and adjusting. We hope we have perfect preventive measures. If not, we'll learn and adapt and move on.
You got it.
All right. So I think the closing question today, I think, gratitude is an important concept, especially right now. Jamie, maybe you want to go first. What's the most surprising good thing about shelter in place or quarantining?
Yeah, and I think so. So I will say, I think gratitude is an important word these days, because I always say, focus on the controllables. Well, there's some ththings that you can control, and that is, kind of your gratitude. That's something you can decide to focus on. And the obvious answer, right? So this is what most surprising versus obvious. The most obvious is the time I've gotten with my family, but I think the most surprising is really, I've lived where I live for 12 years now, and how much I've enjoyed my own property. I take walks where I'm kind of locked in a little bit, even though I'm out in the country. So I mostly walk around a block or down one road. I enjoy to sit and look at the open space. I enjoy the birds, and it's been great for sitting, reflection. Right? People talk about going on a retreat in order to reflect. Well, I feel I can go to the porch and reflect. Yeah. And so I've been truly grateful for. I have friends who are living in condos or apartments in New York City.
Yeah.
Right. And I can't, I can't imagine they probably stare out the peephole to look for a safe time to exit. I feel tremendously grateful for where I live and enjoying the open space, the open air. And I've never been happier that I live where I live, and really enjoy it. Really enjoy the space.
Yeah, because there's a difference where we're here in a temporary apartment. It's a small 1-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles. The apartment complex that we're in right now says required wearing a mask anytime you leave your apartment. So technically speaking, walking out to go put trash down the chute or to go get the mail requires wearing a mask. Now, all things considered, is that the worst thing in the world? No. So one thing I've really tried to practice, in addition to gratitude, is patience and keeping an eye on the bigger picture. Not getting annoyed by things, not being in a rush. I think it's good practice. If you go to the elevator, this would happen more in the condo building in Orlando, 18-story condo building with 3 elevators. You're in the lobby, you've come home from going out for an exercise walk, and, we drive. It would happen. We would drive home, we're on the 4th floor parking, and you hit the elevator to go up, and the door opens and there's somebody already inside, and you're like, you know what? I'm good. I'll wait. I can wait a couple of minutes. It's not the end of the world to wait. And so I've been trying to be more patient. It's not easy. No. But I've been trying to focus on what's important. Is it really important that I rush home as quickly as possible? No. I'll wait for the next elevator. But back to the question of the surprising good thing. My wife and I have been married 18 and a half years, and and we were talking about this. We've talked about this a couple of times. I don't think there's a single point in all of those years of marriage where we have been home in the same place at night every night for 9 consecutive weeks. And she still brought me to California with her, so I'll claim that as a success.
Yep, that's a success. I think that's fair. I've been married 23 years, and maybe in the beginning I'd have a different stat, but I always like to say I've only been married 2 years if you count the time we've been together. So, yeah, it is nice being together, and part of me, while I love my work, I truly do, and I love my clients, and I definitely miss many of them. There's a part of me that wonders why I travel so much, and being home more has made me appreciate that exact thing. So I feel you there, and glad you were able to support her in her move in that whole process, because that's a big deal.
Glad I'm able to. We've done similar math, like how many nights have we actually been home together at the same time, and we always joke like, well, one or the both of us are gone so much we can't get sick of each other. I'm glad I don't think she's sick of me after 9 weeks. So that's reaffirming, that's positive, that's a good thing. So cheers to that.
Cheers. We're both getting quite low.
No, I'm done. I poured just a little splash more. I mean, it's relatively early here in LA, so we got a 3-hour time difference right now.
We haven't had to deal with that yet. We've only had a 1 hour so far.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and wrap up. And for one, thank you everybody for listening. For people who, Jamie and I do this podcast because we enjoy it, and we hope others enjoy it. We appreciate anyone who chooses to join us and listen, and especially if you've gotten to the end here, thank you. But we want to remind people, if this is perhaps the first episode that you have listened to and you are not sick of us and you're willing to come back for more, you can go to leanwhiskey.com. You can spell whiskey Key or KY at the end. Both of those will forward. You can also go to leanblog.org/leanwhiskey. Or if you would rather give the web traffic to Jamie, you can go to...
Yeah, I should probably track that web traffic. I don't really do that. But JFlinch.com/leanwhiskey will also find you at the same point.
Yeah. So speaking of metrics, I don't think we're setting that up as a competition of whether listeners...
I'm sure you'd win.
Prefer, I don't know. But thank you for listening. If you're listening to us and you like the podcast, we encourage you to subscribe. You can find us, if you're listening on the web, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, other podcast apps, and other places wherever you're normally listening to podcasts.
Yeah, and please do, rate us, review us, subscribe. It really, first of all, feedback we love. We both thrive on the idea of continuous improvement, and it helps other people find us if you rate and review us. So you're not just doing it for us, you're doing it for other people. So we really appreciate any amount that you do there.
Yeah, so thank you for that. To everybody who has rated and reviewed the podcast. And if you've got feedback, you can contact us. You can email me, mark@markgraban.com, or Jamie is at
Jamie@JFlinch.com.
I'm probably not going to change my website to mgrab.com.
Probably not. That doesn't quite work the same. I mean, Flinchball, you got to do something with Flinchball, so hence the JFlinch.
All right, fair enough. Hey, quick trivia. Mark Graban is a pretty unique name. The other Mark Graban that I'm aware of is a teacher in the Los Angeles area. So now Be careful. There's I don't know if there's any relation. I don't think there is, but there are 2 Mark Grabans in LA now.
Now your reservations will be confused. The only James Flinchball I'm aware of is my father. So that's although we do get confused because though I think he's thinner than I am, there's an awful lot that looks the same.
All right. Well, Jamie, hey, this has been fun as always. Thank you.
Cheers
To the listeners. Cheers.